O'Neill is an old name, a very old name. But nothing in Ireland, except maybe the land itself, is as old as Newgrange. This ancient tomb was over 3,000 years old at the birth of Christ. So for over 5,000 years, it saw the arrivals of the varied peoples that came to our shores, and sadly too it witnessed the departure of millions of Irish men and women who left us and today are scattered all over the world. So let us go then, you and I, on an Irish journey, an hour's journey only, but endless in the imagination. A journey right through this beautiful country of ours, along the coasts and into the very lands and territories of your own Irish ancestors. These are the majestic cliffs of Moher. They stand defiant, holding back the relentless waves. Below, the broad Atlantic stretches all the way 3,000 miles beyond to the New World. When you stand on these cliffs, you stand on the edge of Ireland, you stand on the edge of Europe. Inland from here lies the fair land of Éireann, Ireland, the home of your ancestors. This is the story of your great O'Neill heritage. We will trace your name from its earliest Celtic origins, following its journey across the green and varied landscape of Ireland, charting the changing fortunes of your royal and noble family. Through ancient castles and aging ruins, we will rediscover the stories of the O'Neill, from their days as mighty chieftains, as high kings, and as courageous rebels. We will discover too how your name has changed over the centuries, and how your ancestors carried it and its traditions with them across the seas to the new worlds. As we hear these stories, we will discover the spirit, the essence of the O'Neill heritage, a spirit of courage, independence, and resolve, which has seen the name survive for nearly 1,000 years. Irish surnames, which began 1,000 years ago, developed in a number of ways. If a family took their father's name, they became known as Mac, like McCarthy, because Mac means the son of. But if they were called after a more remote ancestor, they used the O, which means descended from, as in, say, O'Brien. Meanwhile, the Normans often used Fitz instead of O or Mac, as in Fitzgerald, son of Gerald. Or you could be called after the job you did, as in Smith, or the place you came from, as in Welsh, from Wales. For the 60 million people throughout the world who share an Irish ancestry, St. Patrick's Day is a time for them to come together to celebrate and rejoice in their Irish identity. Although your own family may have left these shores and settled in new lands, it is still possible to trace your ancestors back to their original homelands. Tom Lindert, one of Ireland's leading authorities on genealogy, has some useful advice.
Well, it's very important if someone's interested in doing your genealogy that you get all your background information in your home country first. Don't just try to jump straight over to Ireland. The first thing is that you get a person that you know the most about from Ireland, be it an ancestor, their name, a date to put them in history, be it a birth date, marriage date, or death date, and then a locality, narrow that down as much as possible, be it a county or a townland. But make sure you have the information together to begin with, and then make the next step over to do research in Ireland.
Once you have located an ancestor and have some idea of where they originally came from in Ireland, the records which will allow you to trace your family history are, by and large, available to you. The first place to go to is the National Archives at the Four Courts in Dublin. Documents kept here, such as Griffith's land valuations of the 19th century and the Tithe allotment books, are invaluable in the search for your ancestors. If we take the case of a particular individual, we can illustrate exactly how these documents can help you. Let's look, for example, at the case of James O'Neill. We know that James left Ireland in the 1890s for America, where he eventually married. We also know that the name O'Neill at that time had spread from its Ulster homelands throughout every county in Ireland, but particularly in the north and northeastern counties. At the forecourts, we searched Griffith's valuations and found James's family in Faughart Parish, County Louth. Once we had located James in Faughart, we discovered in the Faughart Roman Catholic Church that James had been baptized on the 15th of November 1879, the son of James O'Neill and Anne Dowdall of Carrick Edmund. With this knowledge, it is possible to trace the history of James's family. So you see, all you need is the basic details about an ancestor, and the quest for information on your family roots can begin. The search for your ancestors is becoming easier all the time, thanks to a recent initiative called the Irish Genealogical Project. This is the Clare Heritage Centre in Corofin. The centre is at the very heart of a new and exciting development. The official surviving records relating to family history and genealogy are being collected throughout the county. They're being brought here and then put on computer. But Corofin's not alone in this. Many other heritage centres have opened up all over Ireland, so that no matter where your family comes from, you should now be able to get an accurate record of your family history. It is possible to trace your ancestors even further back beyond your immediate family, but let's start at the beginning and take a look at the history, the culture, and the country which shaped your forefathers. On the Aran Islands, off the west coast of Ireland, stands the prehistoric fort of Dún enigmatic, poised over the ocean, its ancient builders a mystery even to this day. Over 7,000 years had passed since the first settlers arrived in Ireland. Hunting in the young forests, they slowly ventured up the river valleys, building their dwellings from rough wood and animal hide, and forming small communities hidden in the forest. 2,500 years before Christ, they had developed a society that was stable enough and wealthy enough to produce these majestic dolmens. This dolmen here is the Poulnabrone dolmen, situated in North Clare in the Burren country. Just another part of the wonderment that is ancient Ireland. They built mysterious circles of standing stones. These people we call the Firbolg, or the Fomorians, and the Tuatha Dé Danann, the legendary children of Dana, goddess of magic. Perhaps these early peoples were among your forebears, people who would have known the names of those who lie under the great dolmens. But older than Poulnabrone, older even than the pyramids, is the passage grave at Newgrange in County Meath. Built over 5,000 years ago and designed so that on the winter solstice each year, at the moment of sunrise, a shaft of sunlight penetrates to the very heart of the mound, illuminating the intricate spirals carved in stone. Newgrange was where they paid tribute to their now forgotten gods. These people were superb craftsmen in stone, but a new material was sweeping across Europe from Asia Minor. The Iron Age came to Ireland, and the people who introduced the new material around 500 BC were the Celts, who for almost 2,000 years ruled Ireland as kings. The Celts were a major influence on the course of Irish history and instrumental in shaping our unique Irish identity. Let's listen to what leading archaeologist Barry Raftery of University College Dublin has to say about the Celts.
In the narrowest sense, the term Celtic refers to a language, but it is entirely appropriate to use the term in a broad cultural context. Now, the earliest reference to the term Celt was made by the Greeks about the 6th century BC. They just referred to a specific cultural grouping in Europe as Keltoi. We do not, of course, know whether the Celts themselves used that phrase to describe themselves. Now, in archaeological terms, the Celtic culture begins about 700 BC in Europe, continues until it was destroyed by the Romans around about the birth of Christ. And archaeologists have divided this culture into two broad phases, named after two major find spots in Europe: an earlier phase, which is called the Hallstatt culture, and a later phase, which is called the Latin culture. This is the Latin Celts who are best exemplified in the archaeological record. There are very serious problems of archaeological interpretation. But what we can say is that the earliest indications of contact with the Celtic culture abroad appears in Ireland around about 600 BC, when there are some indications of a Hallstatt presence in the country. We have some Hallstatt material, but it's not very substantial. Around about 300 BC, there's a greater body of archaeological material in the country, which we can certainly equate with the Celtic groups. In many ways, it displays native Irish idiosyncrasies which set it apart from the material in the Latin areas outside the country. We have a vast body of Celtic literature surviving in the country. We have the epic cycle, the Ulster cycle, we have the Fíneachta, we have a whole range of mythology, we have a superb collection of early Irish nature poetry and other poetry, but probably the principal legacy of the Celts, the most enduring, is our Celtic personality. We certainly have a distinctive personality, a warmth, a friendliness. The classical commentators describe the belligerent character of the Celts. Perhaps we have inherited that too, to a certain extent. But we certainly have a distinctive Celtic personality which sets us apart from all other European cultures.
A small island on the edge of Europe, the island of your ancestors was divided up between a number of major Celtic clans. In the south, in what is now Munster, were the Oinecht and the Dalcash. In Connacht, to the west, were the Ibrin. In the province of Leinster were the Hinslig, and to the north, in Ulster, were the Nael. These clans were in time joined by the great Viking and Norman families. The O'Neills are direct descendants of the powerful Nael clan, the most royal of the ancient Celtic families. I am standing in all that remains of Tullahoge Fort in the county of Tyrone. It was here that for centuries the chiefs of the O'Neill clan were inaugurated. Standing as I am in the rich, rolling pasture lands of County Tyrone, I can tell you that I'm at the very heart and centre of power of your great, indeed your royal, O'Neill clan. The kingdom of the O'Neills grew into what are now the counties of Tyrone, Derry and Donegal. From a branch of the Nael known as the Kinall Oin, there came a great chieftain called Niall Glún Dubh. Niall, which means mighty warrior, was a powerful king of Ireland who was slain in battle with the Vikings in 919. 2 generations later, his grandson Donal, to honour his heroic ancestor, took the name Donal O'Neill, or Donal the descendant of the mighty warrior, the first to bear the great name of O'Neill. From that day to this, the beautiful land of the County Tyrone has always been at the heart of the O'Neill story. Situated in the heart of Ulster, Tyrone is a green, gentle and softly rolling county, a land steeped in history and rich in scenic variety, a sometimes mysterious but always welcoming land. The O'Neill name has, of course, spread to different areas of the country. Like today, you will find O'Neills in every county in Ireland, with the highest concentrations in the counties of Clare, Derry and Antrim. But like most Irish families with strong roots associated with one place, the O'Neills are still to be found in greatest numbers in the homeland of their ancestors. Hurling, Ireland's national sport, is reminiscent of the time when the great clans of Ireland battled for land power and the high kingship. It was the strength of Christianity that forged the first real bonds of unity in Ireland, for the Irish took very well to Christianity, so well indeed that in a very short time her monks had established some of the most important ecclesiastical centres in the Christian world. Here in Glendalough in County Wicklow, I always think the sense of Ireland's Christian past is particularly strong. There had been small settlements of monks scattered along the Irish coast for some time, but it took St. Patrick to bring together the old religion of the Celts and the new Christianity. This new Irish Christianity turned out to be a powerful crusading force. With the collapse of the Roman Empire, Europe was once more plunged into the Dark Ages. And strangely enough, that's what gave us, I think, our first emigrants, the young Irish monks who left their Irish monasteries and brought the flame of Christianity back into that pagan continent. At home in Ireland, the monks built the unique round towers, originally as bell towers, and then later used them for keeping safe their priceless chalices and manuscripts. In their workrooms, the monks channeled their passionate Celtic sensitivity into glowing colour and intricate artwork. And certainly, the greatest and most beautiful of the manuscripts is the Book of Kells, now in the library of Trinity College, Dublin. The work of the monasteries, however, was to be disturbed by the arrival of the Vikings. For 200 years, they came as pirates to plunder gold from the great Irish monasteries. However, in 1014, they were finally defeated in battle by the High King of Ireland, Brian Boru, after which they became fully integrated into Irish society. The Vikings built Ireland's first towns and cities, including Dublin, Wexford, Cork, and Limerick. And their commercial ability is reflected today in Dublin's famous Moore Street Market. The Vikings left an indelible impression on the Irish. And with their demise as a great power, coupled with the death of Brian Boru, meant in fact that the High Kingship of Ireland was up for grabs. What followed was almost a century of political instability and unrest, in which the greater Irish families fought amongst themselves for the title of High King of Ireland. It was an eventful century for the O'Neill clan. You see, they considered themselves to be the rightful successors to the throne of the High Kingship of Ireland. And the death of Brian Boru started a vicious struggle between them and the O'Connors, and indeed the O'Briens. And there was much turmoil as these mighty clans fought it out for sheer power. But 100 years of shifting allegiances and bitter infighting left not only your ancestors, but the country as a whole unprepared for the next wave of newcomers to disembark on Irish soil. The Normans, led by the great warrior Strongbow, arrived in 1169. Heavily protected by their coats of mail, they moved like modern tanks through the Irish countryside. They had arrived as mercenaries at the request of the deposed King of Leinster, but a combination of their military might and an attraction to the land of your ancestors induced them to make a more permanent foothold. At the time of the Norman arrival, your ancestors were led by Hugh O'Neill, who was Lord of Tyrone from 1197 until 1230. O'Neill proved more than a match for the Normans. At a major battle in Larne in 1198, Hugh put a stop to the Norman conquest of Ulster. Despite the presence of the Norman threat, however, feuding between the neighbouring Irish families continued. In 1201, Murtagh O'Neill was involved in a feud with Manus O'Loughlin. Murtagh beat Manus to death in a bloody sword fight. Despite this, though, the Normans were still held at bay.
The arrival of the Normans made not the slightest difference to the fortunes of the mighty O'Neill clan, even though the Normans threw up mighty castles like this magnificent castle here at Carrickfergus. It made not a whit of difference to the O'Neills because at that time the land around here was deeply wooded, and the O'Neills were more than a match for any Norman who tried to penetrate across the lands of the mighty O'Neill clan.
Following his victories in battle, Strongbow took the hand of the King of Leinster's daughter, Eva, in marriage, and less than 2 years later, he had taken the crown for himself.
Stony towers are not always protective, for here in Waterford, at Reginald's Tower, the marriage of Strongbow and Eva started a trend that would eventually undermine Norman influence in Ireland. You see, within a century, the Normans and the Irish intermarried, and the Normans adopted the Irish language and culture to a degree that made the English King John declare, "The Normans are more Irish than the Irish themselves."
Following a disagreement over land boundaries in 1208, a savage battle was fought with the neighbouring O'Donnells of Donegal. Casualties were heavy on both sides and Hugh's power was greatly weakened. 3 years later, however, after this vicious battle, the combined army of O'Neills and O'Donnells declared open warfare on the Normans. They first destroyed the castle at Clonus, and then the Norman stronghold at Carrickfergus was burned to the ground. By 1221, Hugh's army had taken Coleraine. They had also raided Dublin and even confronted the O'Connors in Connaught. The campaign came to an end when Hugh died in 1230.
The O'Neills were among the last of the Irish clans to accept the presence of the Normans in Ireland, notwithstanding the many intermarriages that took place between them. And even though they recognized them in marriage, and indeed learnt many of their castle building techniques from the Normans, nevertheless, they upheld a strict observance of their own borders and their own absolute sovereignty within them. From Shane Castle here, which is owned by the present Lord O'Neill, they held on to their properties and maintained their ancient claim to the kingship of Ireland.
The death of Hugh O'Neill saw the end of the O'Neill and O'Donnell alliance. In 1397, Niall O'Neill led an army into Donegal and laid the O'Donnell homeland to waste. Here at Bunratty Castle, the vibrant atmosphere of that period can be experienced in a banquet that is faithfully recreated using historical records from the time.
My noble lords and ladies, my noble guests, the entry of your host this evening, the Earl of Thomond, Mr. Joe Lynch.
Food and drink in the old style, music and song. This is how your ancestors entertained their friends.
This castle now awakes, its ancient glory stirred. The clink of mail and laughter fills its halls, and we inherit all its chivalry. Bunratty bids you welcome. A toast to all you here. Slainte is sail. Slainte is sail.
Let the banquet begin.
By the 15th century, the O'Neills had become so numerous that they had separated out into several different and occasionally opposing families, the most significant of which would have been the O'Neills of Tyrone and the O'Neills of Canaboy. Such was the royalty and power of this great family. Its chieftains were welcome at the courts of the great European kings and were both respected and feared by the rulers of England. But at the height of their power, they were torn apart by internal feuding. In 1474, a great conflict arose in Ulster. The O'Neill chieftain of Tyrone led an army into Donegal. The reasons are unclear, but the intention was vicious. The records say that O'Neill's army swept through the O'Donnell lands, robbing, raping and pillaging. Vast areas of land were laid waste before O'Neill withdrew with his spoils. On his return journey, O'Neill turned northwards and attacked the lands of his cousins, the O'Neills of Clonaboy. They too received no mercy. As he marched home, he was again, to his surprise, confronted by an army of O'Donnells, blocking the road in front of him. He turned to check the rear and saw an army of the O'Neills of Clonaboy marching quickly towards him, driven by anger and revenge. O'Neill of Tyrone, realizing that his men were in no condition to deal with a pitched battle, nonetheless somehow managed to lead his men home to safety.
During the 1500s, the power of the Celtic chieftains began to wane under sustained military pressure from the forces of the English crown. This, in turn, led to a series of rebellions. The last great Celtic revolt ended here at Kinsale in 1601. It had been led by the mighty Hugh O'Neill of Tyrone. In the year 1609, O'Neill and many of the other Irish chieftains left our shores. This was called the Flight of the Earls. It heralded the end of the old Celtic ways. Now it was a new Ireland, new kings, new centres of power. The Flight of the Earls is a testament to the concept of Ireland as an independent nation, the Celtic aristocracy choosing exile rather than submission. To consolidate their power in Ireland, the new rulers sent out clerks to record the names of Ireland. Unable to speak the Irish language, these clerks did not attempt to properly translate the indigenous names, but rather made approximate and phonetic translations. As you travel through Ireland today, you will notice how the signposts carry evidence of that name-changing process which began so long ago. For example, Báile an Mhuircheig, meaning the town of the Murphys, became Ballymurphy. Castlán y Chonaill simply became Castle Connell. The essential Irish culture, however, remains strong and vibrant, and despite continued assault, it has remained so to this day. The Irish have always been proud of their heritage and culture, and nowhere is this more evident than in the art of heraldry. And here to tell you more about that is the former Chief Herald of Ireland, Gerard Slevin.
Heraldry had its origin in the fact that the knight in medieval times, going into warfare, was completely encased in armor, including his head. So there was no means of knowing who he was. So it became the practice to paint on his shield certain emblems or signs or symbols as a means of identification. Heraldry has always had an extraordinary fascination for people, whatever it is about the shield shape and its contents. And in due course, this personal practice spread to cities, universities, institutions, and is still very active. The primary purpose, as I have suggested, was identification. And I suppose that is still the essential purpose of heraldry, is personal or institutional identification.
Your coat of arms is a window to your heritage. Each part is full of stories and secrets. The shield displays two red lions in the combatant position placed against a silver background. The lions represent great strength and deathless courage. Between them they support a hand neatly severed at the wrist. Legend has it that when the first Celtic settlers were in sight of the Ulster coastline, they declared that the first person to touch land would rule that portion of land. One of those Celts, Niall by name, drew his sword, sliced through his wrist and threw the severed hand ashore, thus winning for himself and his descendants the land of Ulster. The 3 étoiles, or stars, implies God's goodness and grace bestowed upon the family. The crest, which is placed above the shield, shows an arm holding in its hand a sword. The arm betokens industry and hard work, and the sword is the true emblem of military honour and justice. The motto in this case is in Irish, and refers to the days of their first arrival on Irish soil. It reads, Love Darug Éireann, meaning the red hand of Ireland.
Many Irish people certainly are entitled to use arms, yes. The registers of the office of arms, the genealogical office, as it is now, the office of the Chief Herald, has registers going back many centuries.
The 17th century saw England convulsed by 2 civil wars in which Ireland inevitably became involved. The Second War was actually fought entirely on Irish soil between 1688 and 1691 and led to disastrous consequences for the Irish. (1691) saw the ending of the Williamite Wars with the signing of the Treaty of Limerick signed on this very stone. The wars are fought between 2 kings, William of Orange and James II, both of whom laid claim to the throne of England. In the event, victory went to King William. For the Irish who supported James II, exile seemed to be the only honourable option. Known to history as the wild geese, these honourable soldiers of fortune sailed from Limerick to Europe, bringing with them the surnames of Ireland. The loss of the great Hugh O'Neill saw a decline in the fortunes of the O'Neill clan. Exhausted as they were in their struggles with Queen Elizabeth I, they were no match for the armies of Cromwell. And when the Williamite Wars started, many O'Neills fought on the side of King James. So that when the wild geese left Limerick, many O'Neills sailed along with them. They served on far foreign fields from Dunkirk to Belgrade. They served with distinction in the armies of Austria, of Spain, and of France. Of course, many O'Neills went to the New World. Sir Niall O'Neill of Shane Castle raised a regiment of dragoons which he led into the Battle of the Boyne. The courage of the dragoons was acknowledged by all, but Sir Niall was mortally wounded. And following the Treaty of Limerick, many O'Neills found success in Europe. They were among the outstanding officers of the Irish brigades who fought with the armies of France. From the days of the early Christian missionaries to the present day, emigration has been an integral part of the history of the Irish people. From this small nation, millions of Irish people have traveled the world over to Europe, Asia, the Americas, Africa, and Australasia. Although many left in search of adventure or to find their fortunes, many others didn't have the choice. In the aftermath of the wild geese, which had seen the best and brightest of their day depart, Ireland was to undergo many changes, the most dramatic of which was the massive transfer of land ownership. As the land changed, so too did the politics. In 1801, the Irish Parliament in Dublin was dissolved,
And as the last vestiges of power dwindled, so too did the wealth of the country, and the land sank into poverty. In 1845, a blight arrived. The potato, the staple diet of the Irish people, was totally destroyed. So began the Great Irish Famine, and so too began the greatest migration of the Irish people. Plentiful supplies of foodstuffs were exported to Britain, while the Irish people were faced with emigration in order to survive. A letter written in 1847 captures the sense of devastation. It is early morning as I write this last note before departing. We now join a huge army forced to leave their native land. The heavy morning mist is a fitting curtain for the final scene, the climax of all our strivings against impossible odds. I cannot help but glance back through the pages of our history to the years when Ireland was a beacon of learning and faith whose light spread to all parts of Europe. God grant that those days of glory may someday return. Irish people emigrated in their hundreds of thousands. They set sail from Cove, Liverpool and Belfast. Cramped together on overcrowded ships, rife with hunger and disease, they arrived in Montreal, New York and Boston. In Australia, famine refugees followed those who had been transported there as convicts. Many of these convicts had been expelled from their home country on charges such as stealing bread. Others for belonging to revolutionary organizations. Despite their impoverished beginnings, the contribution made by those emigrants to their new countries was enormous. In the building of the modern world, from the late 17th century right up to the present day, the Irish have played a vital part in whatever society or culture they have settled in. Today, people of Irish descent number in excess of 70 million worldwide. In the annals of Irish history, the name O'Neill has always held a distinguished place. The great successful 19th century playwright John O'Neill, the brilliant Irish-American playwright Eugene O'Neill, and of course Eugene's father, the great stage actor James O'Neill. The list of distinguished O'Neills is constantly growing.
Is tossa maroon, maroon, maroon. Is tossa maroon, is magragan. Is tossa maroon, is mahaman goban. Shilma crackdown to wagon hodarin.
Many years have passed since Donal, grandson of the great Celtic king, Niall Glúndubh, first took the illustrious name of O'Neill. As an O'Neill, when you come to Ireland, there are many places, of course, you will want to visit. But above all, you must come here to Ulster, to the beautiful mountains of Mourne, because here is truly the gateway to your illustrious O'Neill heritage.
From the earliest days of Irish history, the great name of O'Neill has been at the forefront of Irish life. Those O'Neills who chose exile and emigration rather than defeat brought their traditions of courage and wisdom to their new homes. Across the world, the name O'Neill is still borne with pride.